Welcome everybody to the 10-minute University Noontime Chat. I'm Laura Iyer and I will be presenting information about managing slugs and snails in your garden. For those of you who are not familiar, the 10-minute University trademark includes short classes, videos, handouts on essential gardening information for you, the home gardener. Today's class is the 11th in a series of 25 webinars, and it's hoped that with the help of these webinars, you can improve your garden. For the complete lineup, please go to Clackamas Master Gardener's website. Today, Leah Pullman will co-host and facilitate the question and answers in the Q&A box throughout the presentation. We will be monitoring and posting pertinent hits in the links in the chat box. Let's get started. So the objectives today are to learn some basic biology of slugs and snails, learn what slugs and snails eat, and learn how to control slugs and snails in your garden. Slugs and snails predate humans by 260 to 350 million years. Then when humans arrived, both of them foraged in nature to get their food. Agriculture began about 12,000 years ago, and the battle was joined. According to the Oregon Department of Agriculture, there are 124 species of terrestrial, which means land, slugs and snails in Oregon. The banana slug is one of the largest in the world and is native to the Pacific Northwest. Basically, it's easier to get rid of a pest when you understand it, its habits, and its lifestyle. Slugs and snails are members of the mollusk family, which means squids, octopi, clams, oysters, and mussels. And they do have a vital role in nature. They are magnificently designed to deconstruct. They're basically a stomach on a foot, according to a scientist at Oregon State University, where I got most of my information. Their consuming passion is eating, and they eat 30 to 40 times their weight every day. Slug and snail bodies are comprised mostly of water, and this will become important when we talk about controlling these little guys. The main roles in nature then are eating and breaking down rotting organic matter and turning them into nutrients for plants when they poop. They're a great food source for many mammals, insects, birds, and humans. The slug slime from the banana slug is used to make drugs easier and more effective in curing cancer. This is an outline of the slug and its organs. So they don't have brains. They have ganglia, which regulate the operation of the organs. They're cold-blooded. They have one lung, and they have a small pore called a pneumostome, which opens and closes with each breath, much like a whale. There are two sets of tentacles, and they can be operated independently. The top tentacles have crude eyes. They just have a retina which can see light and dark, and that also can be used for smelling. The bottom two tentacles are used for touching and tasting. Their bodies are dotted with sensory cells for tasting, smelling, reacting to light and dark. They cannot hear. They have the ability sometimes to burrow down to 6 feet in the soil to reach a damp and dark place. Slugs can also elongate their bodies so that they can go down a wormhole to get to a damp and dark place. They have both slugs and snails have a haven that they return to each morning. And this is going to be very important when we talk about controlling them. Slugs and snails can live 1 to 2 years. This is a visual of a slug. The mantle encloses and protects the slug's internal organs, pumps water, filters out food, stores eggs while they mature. The skirt right above the foot can aid in movement. The foot is at the base or bottoms of the skirt, and the rhythmic motion of the muscle helps the slug move along on the slime that it produces. This is a cutie pie. He makes me smile every time I see him. So the black dot on the top tentacle is the retina. The mouth has a soft upper lip and a very sharp lower lip. And the slug and snail have an organ, it's a tongue-like organ called a radula. And it comes out, grabs a piece of leaf, brings it back into the mouth, and then the lower lip cuts it off like a guillotine. The radula has between 14,000 and 27,000 backward-facing teeth. And they can lose a tooth and replace it just like a shark can. These are two different versions of what the radula look like. There are many more out there on the internet, but I thought these were the prettiest. So this is slug damage, and I know you all have seen it. And so the reason that it's ragged is because the radula and those teeth, and then the edges are soft, but the hole is very jagged. So that and the slime trail can tell you that you have a slug or snail on your plant. So various species eat algae, fungi, animal feces, carrion, centipedes, green plants, insects, lichens, worms, and other slugs. They can chew fruit, young plant bark, and when they're buried in the garden, in your soil, they can eat your roots. Here are some slugs feeding aloft, and I have no idea what this plant was, but you can see that they can climb. Looks like they're looking around for their next meal. Slugs have the ability to sway and reach another stem, and they also have the ability to arch their body to get over an obstacle. This slug is going after a California poppy. Mucus and slime, and I use those two terms interchangeably. The slugs and snails glide along a muscular foot that constantly secretes slime. And this facilitates their movement. And then when it dries, it's that silvery slime trail that we all see. In self-defense, the mucus does not taste good to some predators, so it protects them from that. But it also protects them from fungi and bacteria from attacking their bodies. Slugs and snails cover themselves with slime because remember, their bodies are comprised mostly of water. They leave chemical clues in their slime to communicate with other slugs and for ease in communication. And slime is used in mating. There are two different kinds of slime. One is slippery and allows them to climb over rocks, sidewalks, bark dust, mulch, almost anything in their path. The viscous slime, viscous means an adhesive, and a viscous slime helps giving the slug or slime traction. And this is how they can climb a tree, your plant, your house, your container that you've saved your most favorite plants in. Here's a Pacific banana slug climbing down a tree. This is the great gray garden slug, and it's unique because it has those leopard spots, but also the stripes of a tiger, and its common name is the leopard slug. It comes in yellow too. The diet includes fungi, decaying plant matter, and green plants. It's one of the larger slugs. It gets 4 inches to 8 inches long. This is the gray garden slug. It's a small slug. It gets 1 inch to 2 inches and it's the most destructive in the agricultural industry. This is a pair of mating banana slugs. So all land slugs and snails are hermaphroditic, and that means that they carry both male and female organs. So all have the potential to have eggs after mating. They have an elaborate mating ritual, which can last up to half an hour and even longer. Slugs mature between 3 months to 6 months, and then they have the capability to mate and have eggs. They lay eggs in their clear, round eyes, and they're laid in batches, usually 3 to 40, moist soil, under rocks or containers, under debris, in soil cracks and other protected areas. Most eggs hatch in the spring, which will be important when we talk about control later on. A single slug can lay up to 400 eggs a year. So think of this, after mating, both can be pregnant and both can lay eggs and both can lay up to 400 eggs. The slugs can also exude a mucus thread. They start exuding it, and as they twist down the mucus thread, they intertwine and mating happens. And I've seen pictures of this, and the mucus thread can be quite long, and it's usually off a tree branch or a shrub branch, any place that they can swing down. And then if there's wind, they can wave back and forth. Love darts are used in mating, and they're out of calcium carbonate. So during courtship, the slugs and snails try to stab each other. Whoever's the successful stabber typically fertilizes more eggs because there's a hormone attached to the stabbing mechanism. There's many different kinds of love darts. These were just 4 I chose. These are slug eggs, and this is a leopard slug laying its eggs. So 30 to 40 days after mating, the slug lays the eggs under leaves, mulch, or in some dark, protected place. The slug eggs will hatch in 10 to 100 days, and the length of time depends about how warm the temperature is. The warmer it is, the faster the eggs can hatch. So if they are laid in the fall, those eggs can last 100 days, and that's why sometime in the spring you see this burst of slugs and young snails moving around. It's because they've just hatched, and that's important when we talk about controlling later on. The slug has a defensive mechanism that it employs when it's attacked, and it can contract their body, making them harder, more compact, still and round. By doing this, they become more firmly attached to the ground, and that, in addition to the mucus that covers their body, makes them more difficult for the predators to grasp. This slug came to my friend's house during Halloween, and she sent me a picture. So some slugs may die in the fall, while others hibernate underground or beneath loose bark. The survival rate of the slugs depends on the harshness of the winter. In our area, if we have a mild winter, then the slugs and snails can be active all year round. This is a diagram of a snail. Their shells are built out of calcium carbonate, and all the organs are tucked up inside that shell. Most snails are 1 to 1.5 inches long, and it takes a snail 2 years to mature. They can lay up to 80 spherical pearly white eggs at a time, and they dig a little hole in the ground and lay the eggs in a nest. They can lay eggs up to 6 times a year, and they can live 4 to 6 years. So this is an example of snail damage, and you can see that is the same as slug damage because they have the same mouth parts, and it doesn't really matter who's eating your plant, whether it's a snail or a slug, but because control is the same for both of them. This is a photo sent to me by a friend of mating snails, which were on her rock wall. This is two different versions. So she took the picture, sent it to me in an email, disposed of the slugs, and told me later that they died happy. This is a really cool thing that a slug can do, a snail can do. They can seal the opening of their shell with a combination of hardened mucus and calcium carbonate, and it's called an epiphragm. So the cool thing about this is that it's porous enough to admit oxygen and vent gases. It's waterproof and water permissive, which means it regulates the humidity within the shell. In cold use in hibernation. In the summer, when it's hot and dry weather, they can also produce the epiphragm. And in the summer, this hibernation is called estivation. I found these usually in my containers underneath the rim. And when I plucked them off, and they don't want to go, they want to stay within that container. And I've touched that epiphragm and it feels like silly putty. This is the brown garden snail. And the way that it came to the United States is that a Frenchman in the 1850s decided to import culinary escargot, which is the brown garden snail. He was sure that the gold miners in the Bay Area would want to spend some of their money on eating escargot. Well, the miners didn't want to eat escargot. The whole venture failed. He didn't make his fortune, but he dumped the brown garden snail. And now it's estimated that it's cost the California agriculture and nursery industry $7 to $10 million a year in lost product. They arrived years ago in Oregon, probably on product or in cargo. And the Oregon Department of Agriculture has declared them too numerous to be eradicated. All we can do is control them the best we can. They live 4 years. All these little knobbies on this orange tree are brown garden snails. Pretty amazing. This is the giant East African snail. So it was first introduced to Hawaii in 1936, and then later to the continental United States in 1966. And it's thought that they were brought to Hawaii as pets or for educational purposes, or they could have come in on cargo. They can be voracious pests in tropical and subtropical areas. It was first found in southern Florida in 1966. And it took 10 years and $1 million to eradicate them. Then in 2011, they were introduced again, probably as pets or for educational purposes, and eradication efforts are underway. So the giant African snail is one of the most damaging snails in the world because it can consume over 500 types of plants, and it can cause structural damage in stucco and plaster structures. This snail can also carry the parasitic nematode, which can cause meningitis in humans, and it can also carry the lungworm parasite. The giant African snail reproduces quickly. It can produce 1,200 eggs a year each, and it lives 7 to 12 years. A friend sent me this, and I think the picture came from the internet. First, that woman should be handling this snail with a glove on. But it looks so royal up there, like I belong. Banana slugs have been clocked at 6.5 inches per minute. And according to that scientist down at Oregon State, it's about the speed of a line at the grocery store. The milky slug can travel up to 40 feet a night, and a snail goes at a pretty speedy 3 feet per hour. And it's easier for both the slug and the snail to travel on someone else's slime. So on sunny days, they seek hiding places out of the heat and bright light, and they can be active throughout the year like we've talked about. They're relatively inactive when the temperature drops below 38 degrees or rises above 88 degrees, and they stay underground during windy times or heavy rain. Now we're going to talk about controlling these little guys. We're going to talk about cultural and physical control and then commercial control later. So first is plant selection, optimum timing of irrigation, elimination of habitat, manual removal, destruction of the eggs, and trapping and exclusion by barriers. And I chose this slide because the little guy on top of the big snail is a young one, and you can always tell a young snail because their shell is transparent. And as they age, then the shell hardens and gets darker. And remember I told you that it's easier for them to go on other slime? This little guy just decided, I'll just climb on the snail, it'll take me. And he's saying, are we there yet? So the Pacific Northwest is known as the Garden of Eden in the United States because we can grow so many different plants. We have a nice wet climate, which is perfect for slugs and snails. So this is a list of resistant plants, and Vinca and you are just a continuation of the list. And then plants that slugs and snails love to eat. This is a list that's in that 10-minute university handout called Managing Slugs and Snails. The key is slugs and snails love to eat tender, succulent leaves. So choosing plants that are leathery, stiff, or aromatic might give you a better chance of having a healthy plant without damage. Generally, native plants are slug and snail resistant. Most woody plants and ornamental grasses are quite resistant. I grow a lot of ornamental grasses in my yard, and I have an evergreen grass that's red. And last year when I was doing winter cleanup in the spring, I was pruning out the grass and I found 15 snails down at the crown. So now I know that's a place that they love to hide during the day. So now it's a place I monitor every day when I'm on slug and snail patrol. What you want to do is create a habitat that is unsuitable for slugs and snails. So you know that they love damp, dark places, rotten leaves, rocks, and old bricks. Weedy and grassy borders are also an excellent place to hide. As gardeners, we know that watering in the morning is best practice. What happens when you water at night? You're making your garden damp and it's dark because it's nighttime. Perfect place for slugs and snails to eat. Till in the spring so that there's little debris for slugs to feed on as they emerge from the eggs. So remember, slug eggs, snail eggs are in a little hole in the ground. And so use a hoe throughout the year. And I use it to kind of fluff up the garden beds because it looks nice. But I'm also bringing up the eggs that have been hidden that another predator can eat. And I'm bringing up slugs sometimes that have thought that hiding in the mulch was a great idea. Mulch is beneficial to both plants and soil, but it also creates that area that slugs can hide. Hand picking. So it's probably better to use chopsticks or tweezers. I use a garden trowel and then I dump them in a bucket of soapy water. And because the slime is viscous, It feels kind of like rubber cement if you get it on your hands. Use vinegar and warm water, and then you can get the slime off your hands. Copper barriers are really efficient. And it's thought that slugs and snails get a electric shock when they crawl over it. Or the other thought is that crossing the copper barrier slows down the production of slime. And they can't exist without slime, and they can't move without slime. So they turn back. In most cases, it only works if the strip is wide enough that the slug or snail can't get over it. And with snails, that strip needs to be 4 inches. Because remember, the gray garden slug is 8 inches long, so it can arch its body over the 2-inch strips. And the copper barrier in the tape form is usually in 2-inch strips. So look at the copper tape on the left-hand side, and it's being approached by a leopard slug. That isn't going to be, the tape isn't going to be big enough for to protect the plant, because that slug can work its way up, arch its back, and then crawl in to where the pot is, to where the plant is, and it could just eat to its heart content. Garden mesh is a new product that's come out in the last few years. And this is a good picture of what not to do. This is going to be a large house, so you can tell how big the leaves are already. And one leaf is already out. And so what the slug and snail do is just reach up, get on that leaf, travel down the stem, and now it's around the plant with all these great leaves to eat. Probably a better use of this garden mesh would be to lay it flat so that slugs and snails can't travel over it, but have the flat part be at least 4 inches wide. And then as the hosta grows, or any other plant that you're using this method, you're going to have to keep enlarging the wire mesh so that it's without the plant. Without the leaves of the plant is inside your large circle. This is copper wire around a tree, and you can see that snails just will not get over it. Here's another example. This is copper tape, and it's flanged at the bottom, and the snail can't arch its body over it. This was an experiment. And the slugs and snail's favorite food is there: cucumbers, lettuce, apples, and the snails can't make it. It's teasing them, but it works. Okay, so lime, ashes, and diatomaceous earth slow down the slugs, but it does not kill them. And diatomaceous earth will not work if it gets wet. Slugs and snails seem to be very sensitive to the coffee grounds. It may be toxic to them. And rain washes out caffeine over time, and it acidifies the soil. So coffee grounds probably aren't the best use. I've used coffee grounds in the past thinking it might work, and the slug and snails didn't matter. They just climbed right over it. Because once it rains or you use irrigation, the caffeine in it washes out. So Morton salt does not work as a barrier. It works when you pour it on them, and then they die. And repeated use of salt can make your soil toxic to plants. There are better ways to use deterrents. These two probably aren't the best. Vinegar spray with equal parts vinegar and water works the same as salt. And in the spray bottle, you just spray the slug. What you have to be careful with is that spraying vinegar, even if it's in a mixture on a plant, will cause your plant to burn. So you have to be very careful when you use this. Eggshells, especially if you have a chicken farm, are great, but you need a lot of eggshells, and they work best when they're fresh. And they work not because they're pointed and sharp, it's because they stick to the snail and slug's body. And nobody likes to walk around with eggshells on their body. And then as they age and they get wet, then they get soft, and it doesn't matter. The slug and the snails travel right over them. Here are natural predators like toads, snakes, beetles, marsh flies, birds, frogs, foxes, salamanders, newts, ducks, millipedes, porcupines, and raccoons. All love these guys. Especially chickens. A friend of mine has chickens, and as she goes through her garden bed and picks up the slug or snails, then she goes to the chicken coop and says, "Girls, slugs." And they come clucking over, so happy. Here's another way for traps. The main goal of a trap is to coax the slug or snail into an environment where he thinks he's safe. So you want to place the traps out in the evening with fresh produce and then check them in the morning. And then dispose of any slugs or snails. I think everyone has heard of a beer trap. And the way that it works is they're attracted to the scent of yeast in the beer. So scientists thought, I wonder what makes it work. I wonder if different beers are more effective with slugs or snails than other beers. I think we should test this. So they bought a lot of beer, tried different things, and they found that whole beer works the best. Light beer, like Bud Light or Coors Light, didn't matter. It was too watery. And the slugs or snails thought, we like this. So if you do this, buy whole beer, the cheapest you can find, and put it in a container, a large container, so that when they fall in, they'll drown. And you can see the larger snails in this slide, they can climb out, but the smaller snails drowned. The beer is only effective for about 3 days, and then you'll need to replace the beer in your traps. The key when you do this is to remember where your traps are, because in the fall, when you find you're missing beer traps, it's a disgusting mess. And I know this from personal experience. Cucumber as a novel attractant. So scientists are constantly on the look for what can we use to put in a bait that will attract the slug or snail. Cucumbers have seemed to be one of the best options available. So Dr. Rory McDonald down at Oregon State, he's the invertebrate crop pest specialist. So he helps farmers manage the pesky slugs or snails in their field. And they found that the essence of cucumbers, the smell, is what attracts a slug or snail. So they have defined that chemical and are going to put that in a bait form. And soon it will be available to agricultural industry and then later to the home gardener. However, as a home gardener, you can use your excess cucumber crop, put them in a container, make sure the container is deep enough, put water on top, and you've got a slug bait. The key is it probably will need to be replaced after about 3 days. Now we're into commercial baits. So my dog, as a puppy, all my dogs have eaten slugs and snails. And then I have to go in with my finger and clean out their mouth. of slimy slug and snail bits. And young children are also attracted to snails and slugs. And this is a friend of mine's grandson. So one of the baits that you use can be very dangerous to humans. So you need to be aware of this. Metaldehyde products are one of the best around. And you can always tell what the ingredients is because it'll be the first ingredient on the package. And it was found in 1930s at a South African mining camp. Metaldehyde was used as a camp fuel. And one morning they woke up, the camp stove had fallen over, metaldehyde had spilled out, and all the slugs and snails were dead. Ah, a moment. So that information went to Europe, to England, to the United States. And how it works is the rapid destruction of the mucus production, which reduces their mobility and digestion and promotes dehydration to exposure to the sun. It's not recommended around edible vegetables. It can be harmful to dogs, cats, birds, and fish. And because metaldehyde by itself isn't as effective now, because it's been about 90 years, some products, manufacturers are using carbaryl as an additive to this bait. And carbaryl is deadly to beneficial insects. So you need to use this product with caution. Iron phosphate products are safe to use around pets, humans, fish, birds, beneficial insects, and mammals. You can use it around food and berry crops, lawns, gardens, greenhouses, until harvest day. And the way that it works is that it interferes with the calcium metabolism in the slug or snail, and that causes them to stop eating, which is the whole point, and then they die within 3 to 6 days. When you throw it out, you want to throw it out like you're scattering seed. You don't want to dump it in one spot. You want to have as many slugs and have as many pellets available to slugs and snails as you can. Don't it's effective for about 2 weeks, even with water. And what's not eaten by the slug or snail, then is used as a fertilizer for your soil. This is a snail drinking fountain at the Oregon Garden in Silverton. There is no single strategy that works in a garden, so use a combination of strategies for control. Fall is the most effective time to control. Your goal is to prevent egg laying. You want to bait and deter throughout the season. Till when you can. Sanitation always so that they don't have a place to hide, and protect your most favorite plants. The reality is you're probably never going to be able to get rid of every single slug or snail in your garden. So do cleanup so there's little debris for the snails and slugs to hide. Ideally, late February and March are the best times to spread the bait before foliage has come out for them to eat. So with less foliage to eat, they're more liable to eat your slugs and snails. Bait now. Thank you for coming. This is an art photo. This is on a hydrangea. So please visit the Master Gardener's handout, Managing Slugs and Snails, that you can download for free. Also, Oregon State has 2 brochures to help you manage your garden. Thank you.
Okay, Laura, that was Fascinating. I learned more than I ever thought I could about slugs and snails. And we have a few questions. Um, a couple of questions on the chickens and the eggshells.
Mhm.
One, snails and slugs possibly carry parasites that could hurt the chickens.
I don't know that. That
Okay.
would be something that you would have to research. But you think of all the things that slugs and um, that chickens eat. I'm not sure. I'm just not sure.
Okay. And then how dense and finely chopped should the eggshells be if you're going to use those or
They don't need to.
carry?
The just like if you were breaking an egg or breaking off an Easter egg,
Mm-hmm.
just crunch them up and toss them out. It takes a tremendous amount of eggs to have enough eggshell product to put around a plant.
Okay. Thank you.
Because you have to think of how wide the eggshell barrier has to be. And then as the plant grows, you might have to expand that.
Mm-hmm.
And then as soon as those eggshells get wet over time and become soft, you get to redo it.
Okay, Christina says that she sees more snails than slugs when it's drier. I'm sorry, she sees more snails than slugs when it's drier, and more slugs than snails when the moisture goes up. Is she right in thinking that soil moisture and rainfall encourage slugs and drier conditions encourage snails?
I'm not sure that's correct because both of them do not like. So, slug and the snail are basically the same creature. The snail just has a shell.
Mm-hmm.
So, they're going to be happier in the same situations and be um, susceptible to the drying of sun and to light. They just do not like the light. They try to hide because the light, the sun will dry them out if they don't have enough mucus production. So I think it's more, um, the snails might be out more because they have a shell that protects them, but, and the snails are buried. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Um,
kind of. They're out there. They have an amazing ability to hide.
yes, I think most of us have discovered that.
Yeah.
um, Going to the beer and the light beer and the yeast, Brenda just made a comment that says she's found expired yeast mixed with water works as well as strong beer for trapping slugs. But it's just as
What was the ingredient?
expired yeast.
Oh yeah, yeast and honey. It's
Yeah.
the same thing because
And,
beer has yeast.
and honey, did you say?
No,
Oh,
did
okay.
I? I don't mean that. I might mean that because honey would allow the yeast to coagulate, and it would be easier for the snails and slugs to eat.
Okay.
And the whole purpose is you're attracting them to a scent so that they drown in the water.
Okay.
It's not that they're eating and dying; it's that they're eating and drowning. That's why some of your container has to be pretty deep, like a great big cottage cheese container, so that the bigger ones can't crawl out. You saw in that slide that I had that the big ones can say, "Oh well, going out," and the young ones or the smaller slugs drown. The whole purpose is to drown them.
So this is a question from me. If I'm using a cottage cheese container or a big yogurt container, would I catch more if I buried it in the ground a little bit so that it's easier for them to get in, or I just wouldn't need to worry about that?
Uh, you, Burying in the ground works great, but remember that slugs have that ability to climb because they exude a viscous slime.
Hmm.
So they can easily climb up a container that's not buried. It's
Okay.
just when you use those baits, yeah, You have to realize other things can get in them, some beneficial elements, like frogs or things that are beneficial to your garden.
Mhm.
So you need to check them often to let those guys out if they haven't drowned already.
Okay. And
Like
speaking
frogs.
of water and drowning slugs, somebody said is it the cucumber in the water that kills the slugs? Or is it the cucumber that just attracts them and then the water kills the slugs? That's what,
Cucumber is the attractant and the water is the method. But you
okay.
have to be pretty deep. And then you realize after a while, those cucumbers get mushy and
Yeah.
they don't exude the chemical, the smell that attracts the slug or snail into the bait vehicle.
So how often should you change cucumbers?
Once they get mushy, about 3 days is max.
Okay.
You can tell.
There you go, Colleen. That answered your question. Um, does the normal use of sluggo or iron phosphate cause buildup of nutrients in the soil?
Usually you don't, or you aren't using that much, and remember you're scattering on them,
Mm-hmm.
and you do it during the season where you see your slugs and snails. So that hasn't been proven to be a problem. This is the one I use because all my puppies have thought slugs and snails were the best.
Someone's asking what iron phosphate products are on the market. I think that would be a good place to just do a Google rather than us getting into that.
Mhm.
Um,
And iron phosphate will be the very first ingredient. That's what you look for. There are several different baits out there, but iron phosphate is the one that I use because I have a dog who has tasted slugs and snails, and I don't want her to be poisoned by another method. So you really have to check the ingredient. Metaldehyde is deadly to
okay.
pets.
There are a couple of hosta questions here, and someone said, and we all love our hostas, and so do the slugs and snails. So it's always a battle. On a Gardener's World episode, hosta growers recommended spraying plants and soil with diluted garlic water solution to kill young snails and slugs. Have you heard of or tried this? And then the question following that is, isn't there some solution you can put into hostas, et cetera, to kill the eggs? You want me to repeat the first one?
No, I'm
Okay.
thinking. So as a master gardener, I've heard of like things that work for people. And when I give the slug talk to garden groups, there's usually like farmer methods that have been tried and true. But as a master gardener, I can't recommend them because they're not approved. I have to stay within the methods that can be proved with scientific data. If you have data that it's like my grandmother said, it might work for you and that might be a good method.
Mhm.
But as a master gardener, I can't say it because it's not scientific method.
So they could try diluted garlic and see if it works for them, but it's not something
Mhm.
that we can recommend.
Right. And
Okay.
some of the garden talks when I give this and the garden clubs have ladies that have gardened forever and they have great ideas. And I advise them to share them because if they work, cool. I just can't use it as a master gardener.
Yeah. Okay. Um, are nematodes something that can be used for slug control?
I haven't heard of that. Huh. That'd be something for me to research. I don't know. Have you ever heard of that?
I have not.
Yeah.
I have not.
I don't know if they're nematodes specifically for slugs and snails. I know that there are many things that like to eat slugs and snails, source of protein, but I don't know that it would be any more of a control than everybody else, like birds who
Yeah.
eat slugs and snails.
Another, any reason not to just squish slugs and snails?
No, I do that. And I also step on them. It depends on how squeamish you are. I'm not, and in some methods, it's to me, sometimes it's easy, it's more humane for me to kill them instantly with my boot, my shovel, my fingers, if they're ground garden snails,
Mhm.
than try any other thing else. When I garden and I see them, they're dead meat.
Yes.
Sorry.
What about hazelnut shells as a deterrent?
Not so much. My neighbor grows hazelnuts, and so there are bags of hazelnuts that are available to me, and I've tried them out, and it has not seemed to diminish my supply of garden snails and slugs at all. And slugs and snails, even though they don't have a brain, are very persistent, and they can weave their way around. I haven't found the shells to be a deterrent of all times. And once the shells get soft, then it doesn't matter. It has not proven to be effective in my garden. And I have a garden that apparently every single slug and snail thinks is dessert. And it's so bad in my garden. And I know slugs and snails that I can no longer grow hostas. They have beaten me.
Oh,
I know.
it's a shame. Yeah.
And I have a shade garden too. It's very sad.
Catalina wants to know, will Epsom salt, which is beneficial to soil, kill slugs?
You can try it. Why
Again,
not?
that's one of those, give it a try.
It's not on my list of approved methods. You would have the way that salt works is it dehydrates them, and they can't exist out the mucous membrane. And so it probably would work, but again, I don't know the efficiency of Epsom salts in your soil. That would be something to research. It's not anything that I've ever come across before.
Yeah. Kendra wants to know, what do you do with a bunch of drowned slugs?
So I throw them in the compost pile.
Okay.
And I
Or
let
the garbage can or the greens can or whatever,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
I let all the microorganisms in my compost pile have dinner.
Hey, are there any native slugs or snails that are beneficial?
So I don't think slug and snail and beneficial are in the same sentence. So, but you know, it's a food source down in many countries. So that would be one. And they are beneficial in that they're food source for many animals, as I showed in that slide. So, and usually what they eat is healthy. So yeah, beneficial from a food standpoint,
Yeah.
if you want.
Yeah. Is there some home slug trap you can make out of a 2-liter plastic pop container, and is it effective? And then somebody else wants to know, is there a way to make it attractive to slugs and not to earthworms? I've never had earthworms in my slug traps, but maybe that's a
I
problem.
haven't either. I don't know exactly what earthworms eat, so I'm not sure about that. I've never seen an earthworm in my slug trap, excuse me, my beer traps. This is a good question. I don't know.
I think earthworms, I mean, my earthworms, I have a worm composter, so they eat, you know,
They're eating
dead and dying foliage.
same thing as a slug.
Yeah.
Well, and remember, slugs can go down earthworm holes. Slugs can go down earthworm holes. Slugs have the ability, you know, if you see a slug and it's like this wide, it can contract to go down an earthworm hole to get out of the light And then it waits until the conditions are good for it to come back out.
Mhm. Okay.
Hmm.
Someone has new galvanized raised bed. This is Jerry. Does that deter mollusks, the galvanized beds? You know, stock troughs and stuff?
I don't think so. The only way that it might work is just like copper if they get some sort of electric shock. And I'm not sure galvanized um, tin does that. What he could do is wrap his um, container with copper tape to be sure.
And about 4 inches of copper tape, right?
For
No,
slugs. Yeah,
not just 2.
right, right.
Okay.
For having no brain, they're amazingly focused, and they will figure out a way to get up and in if they can. So you have to think of creating some kind of barrier that's going to prevent them, because they have all day and all night to think about, well, not think, to try different ways to get in. Scientists, this is kind of off the subject, but scientists wanted to see if slugs or snails remembered, because they don't have a brain. And so what they did one year, well, it was a short year because slugs don't have a long lifespan, and they did it with slugs, is they created a box, and it had different doors, and through one door would be food, through the other door would be nothing. And so the slugs over this period of time would figure out, and because all the slug trails were leading to this one door that had food in it. Okay. Then the scientists took out the slugs or slugs, waited a month or 2. They couldn't wait too long because they'll die. They put them back in, and they found the slug trail and went right to the food. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
I love these little guys. I didn't kill every single one, but I enjoy them. You know?
Let me see. Is there best practice while using iron phosphate baits? I think you answered that, but again, that's sprinkling, and how often and how much do you use? I mean, is it a pretty?
Iron phosphate lasts for about 2 weeks, even with watering, and then you need to replace it. And the best way is to scatter it, because you want to attract as many slugs and snails as you can. Dumping it kind of defeats the whole purpose, because slugs and snails don't congregate together unless they're mating.
So would it be, I mean, I've never done this before. I always do it around my plants, but could you do it like kind of in a perimeter of the garden where,
Mhm.
you're fairly certain they're not spending the
Tried
night?
already?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've known nurseries that have done that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but still, you have to remember that bait is going to at some point be water soluble, and you'll need to refresh it.
Yeah. Okay.
The same thing with metaldehyde in the pellet form. People have used that around the perimeter of their garden. You just have to remember that it's poison, and you don't want any of your animals or young children putting that in their mouth. But again, that is destroyed by water and time. If you do use bait around the perimeter, you just have to accept that you're going to refresh it.
Okay. I think that's about all that we have time for. There are several questions that we did not get answered, and I would encourage you to go to the Master Gardener Helpline, which is metromastergardeners.com. Hang on, I've lost my link to that.
Probably org.
Metromastergardeners.org. Thank you. And we thank you so much for joining us, and hope you learned a lot. And follow those links. You'll get all kinds of information at cmastergardeners.org. 10-minute university video handouts, and this will be recorded, and there is being recorded, and it will also be available there. So thank you so much. And we hope to see you at our next noontime chat.